Well, tonight, the World Health Organization is calling on international donors to resume funding of Afghanistan's health care program amid fears of a humanitarian crisis. They say the country's already fragile health care system is overwhelmed with hundreds of thousands of vulnerable Afghans deprived of access to care. International funding was suspended when the Taliban took over the country over fears that the money would be used to support the new administration and possibly terrorists. DW correspondent Nick Connolly, he is in Kabul, Afghanistan tonight. Good evening to you, Nick. If you could give us a picture of what you've seen. What is daily life like there under Taliban rule?
Well, Brent, this is a country in limbo. I think the first flush of victory, that first heady month of the Taliban taking over, taking selfies next to abandoned American Humvees, that's now over. They're well and truly aware of the huge challenges facing them now. The fact that they've got to somehow get almost 40 million people fed in an economy that's facing huge problems where the currency is tanking against the US dollar and most basic foodstuffs are imported and have to be paid for with dollars. I think lots of the daily life continues to an extent as it did before. Okay, alcohol has disappeared from the restaurants. Women have stopped going to work in the ministries, at least in higher ranking jobs, but not everyone is walking around in burqa. You see women out on their own without male relatives, and it really depends from region to region how these rules are being interpreted. And there's a huge amount of uncertainty about how this new Taliban regime is going to be. Is it going to be something different, or will it be a rerun of the 1990s where women were essentially forced to stay at home and were pushed out of the public sphere? So there's lots of uncertainty and lots of fear about where this is going to go.
Yeah, that's a good point. We are hearing reports that there are divisions within the Taliban leadership. What's your assessment?
Well, obviously, for 20 years, these people had a clear enemy. They were united by their opposition to that pro-American government. And now that that enemy has gone, has fled, suddenly these people are discovering that they have significant differences of opinion. But I think the bigger dichotomy is between the top-level people who've lived abroad in Qatar, in Pakistan, who are maybe willing to cut some kind of deal with the West in return for humanitarian aid to stabilize that economy, and the rank-and-file foot soldiers who were fighting for some kind of religious purity and a regime based on Sharia. And if they see that this regime is making, new regime is making too big a compromise with the West to get that funding, they might turn out to be very disappointed with their own leaders. So lots of problems there, and a whole new set of challenges for people who spent 20 years bearing arms and not running a country.
And Nick, we want to let our viewers know that you just returned from a refugee camp in the northern Afghan city of Mazar Sharif, where many people are facing malnutrition, they lack medical care, humanitarian aid. We want to take a look now at your report, and then we're going to come back and talk about it. Let's take a look.
A year ago, these people all still had homes. Months of intense fighting as the Taliban advanced, coupled with an unprecedented drought, finally pushed them off their land after decades of hard scrabble. 500 families now live here on the edge of Mazar Sharif, sharing one water pump and little else. Toiva doesn't have pictures of her sons alive to show us. They were lost in the fighting that claimed both her husband and her son's lives this summer, after their village was caught between Taliban and government troops. All she has left now is her son's phone and pictures from their funeral.
I've got nowhere else to go. All the responsibility for my daughters is now on my shoulders. Everything is so expensive. Me and some of the other women here go begging in the city. We collect scraps of bread to bring back to the camp for everyone to eat.
Before the Taliban takeover, international aid agencies provided some basic supplies. Since they pulled out, these people have been on their own, and the Taliban aren't able to fill that gap. A man wants us to see his neighborhood in this tent city. He's been in a wheelchair since the fighting of the 1990s. The last few years, he says, have been by far the hardest for him and his neighbors. This woman has 7 children, and her youngest are struggling with malnutrition.
First there was the fighting, then pests destroyed our crops. When the rains failed, there was just nothing left to eat. That's why we came here.
Even if the fighting is now largely over, these people, like hundreds of thousands of other Afghans, have nothing to go back to. As winter draws closer, they're waiting and hoping for the international community to find some way of engaging with the Taliban and to bring in urgently needed supplies.
And Nick, in the meantime, the Taliban, they're in charge. They have to govern. How are they trying to fill the gap that has been left by international aid agencies that have left the country?
Well, the short answer is they can't. Those people we met there in Mazar-e-Sharif told us that they'd gone to the local Taliban chiefs in Mazar-e-Sharif asking for help, asking for some kind of support, and were told that there simply wasn't anything. And that is why we are seeing now these efforts to engage with the international community. Even when you arrive at Kabul airport, there's a huge poster saying the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan seeks peaceful and prosperous, or something like that, relations with the outside world. This is very much a charm offensive because they are acutely aware that they don't have the resources and the means to keep people fed and happy going into winter, which is pretty hard in this part of the world. So a lot of uncertainty there and no guarantee that people here across the country are going to be looked after. Having said that, aid agencies are telling us that they feel safer now because in the years leading up to this Taliban takeover, the Taliban was targeting international organizations. There were threats to international people coming in to run those aid efforts. And now the Taliban is in government. Those attacks have largely ended. So a chance there for some kind of stability and a better future for millions of Afghans.
DW's Nick Connolly reporting from Kabul tonight.